Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, come on. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. There it is. My name is Angelica Hairston, and I am so thrilled to be facilitating this very important discussion amongst some amazing leaders in the field. It's really wonderful to have all of you here as we discuss out with the reach. So we're talking about very meaningful ways of engaging with communities. I know all of us have seen some organizations do it really well, ways that are sustainable, ways that are meaningful, ways that really build relationships. And we've also seen the opposite, right? So this time together is really about finding tangible solutions and ideas that we've seen in the field from some of our amazing colleagues who are here on the stage. I want to invite all of us to be a part of the conversation on Slido. So you can visit slido.com. It's a place that you can enter in questions that you have for the panel. And when we get to the Q&A section, that will be a time for us to really engage and allow you all to help us lead the discussion in the direction that you all would like to go. So let's get going, yeah? We're going to take some time to introduce ourselves to all of you so you know who's on the stage, starting with Cassidy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cassidy Fitzpatrick Carlson, and my title is Vice President for Musician Advancement at the New World Symphony. And what that means, among other things, is that I oversee all of our community engagement activities. And prior to being a vice president, I was the director of community engagement for 3 years. So really, I focused very solidly on community engagement. And it's taught me so much about myself, so much about the musicians I work with every day, and has really enabled me to learn so much about the beautiful city that we call home, Miami, Florida.
Fantastic. Angie.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Durrell. I am from Stamford, Connecticut, originally from Ecuador. And my role as a social entrepreneur has really been teaching myself, finding mentors to help me understand how community engagement truly works and how to create authentic partnerships. And most especially, my work is being the founder and executive director of InTempo, intercultural youth development organization.
And I'm Tehvon Fowler Chapman. I'm the director of artistic administration at National Sawdust in Brooklyn. In my role, we focus mostly on kind of the programs that are on our stage. But as a former educator and as a person who likes to look at the organizational from a more holistic standpoint, I try and think about how our programs can, how they can have more of an impact in the community, but also how we as a mission, as an organization as a whole, really serve the needs of whatever community that we're in a meaningful way.
Fantastic. And I'm Angelica Hairston. I'm the founder and executive director of Challenge the Stats, which is a concert series in Atlanta, Georgia, that uses music as a tool for social change and really empowers artists of color. So we really try and find ways to engage the community by showing the visibility and the beauty of Black and brown musicians on stage. So hopefully that gives you guys a bit of an overview of who's on stage and a bit of perspective there. In our time together, we're going to take a bit of time to explore the difference between outreach and community engagement. We've kind of heard those two words thrown around in the field. So Tehvon, will you give us a bit of perspective on the differences between those two things?
Yes, and so with outreach, it's been a word that's been historically used in a lot of our more institutional organizations. And in this conversation, I want to just point out that outreach in itself is not a bad thing. But what is kind of dangerous is when we try and equate it with community engagement. The way that I think about it the most is just kind of asking the question of who does it serve the most? If it serves the organization in getting the message out to what we already do, and if it's more to the benefit of the programs that we already provide, then it's more of it's more of an outreach perspective. But if you're really sitting down and looking at how does this serve the community, what are the needs in which the community can feel connected to the organization, and what resources can we leverage to make what is going on all around the organization a better place, that's more how I define community engagement. One of them is about promoting ourselves, and the other one's about really making a lasting impact in whatever way we can in our communities.
Absolutely. And Angie, at InTempo, you all have really taken the time to develop even a criteria around the community engagement that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times A lot of people may reach out to me specifically or organization because it fills a diversity bucket per se, but we're always very purposeful that it fits our mission and our core values of being relevant, accessible, and inclusive. And certainly it helps us promote our vision of a commitment to innovation, interculturality, and inclusion. So I'll share an example of one of our key strategic and sector, also cross-sector partnerships that we have in Connecticut. We have multiple partners, but one of them is the Stanford Public Schools, the United Way, helping with the Cradle to Career efforts and youth development. But we also call some of our funders our partners, and that's the beauty that we've been able to learn and grow with organizations like Spread Music Now and their Music Empowers efforts, included, and also Carnegie Hall through their Play USA, Play USA network. But one particular partnership that we have is with the Norwalk Youth Symphony, and this has been going on since 2012. So it's not a one-off concert partnership. They did not agree to partner with us just to say, okay, let's see how it goes. It has been very purposeful and thoughtful for the past 7, going on to our 9th year of the organization. And not only in terms of a symphonic concert that presents our cross-cultural repertoire from different communities, from different cultures and languages, but so that they have supported our students, our music students, in creating a pathway. So we started this little kid like Valeria, for example, when she was 6 years old on the violin. Now she has a full scholarship to play with them, and we continue to collaborate on this partnership to offer to more students of Intempo. And this partnership has been reciprocal. So it's not just Intempo benefiting from them, the Youth Symphony benefiting from us. Our latest opportunity is we're partnering with Midori and Friends in the spring of 2020. And this is something that came as a result of their efforts in trying to make their opportunities more accessible, relevant, and inclusive to them. So rather than continuing to speak, I just want to show a quick video of one of the main partnerships that we have. So at our last cultural crossover concert, we had over 900 people, almost 1,000 people on the audience. We have over 150 musicians on stage.
Each year, Intempo exposes Norwalk Youth Symphony musicians and families to different musical and cultural traditions. Our students are performing musical genres that are completely different from what they are accustomed to playing.
The orchestra opened with some classical masterpieces from Tchaikovsky, Brahms, and Carlos Gardel from Argentina.
My favorite part on the last concert was when they played the cumbia.
We had cumbia, that is a unifying rhythm from South America and Central America. We tied the cumbia style to fit the countries and to represent the cultures of Peru, Colombia, and Mexico.
Some of those songs we used to hear it back in our country. It was very emotional.
My favorite part of the concert was the cumbia session because I got to play my instrument.
My favorite thing is when I was playing the viola and singing.
My favorite part was playing songs like Poco Poco.
Concerts like these are so important because it brings 2 or more institutions together in celebrating their mission, but also being exposed to something new.
What impressed me the most was how Intempo's musicians had grown over the years and were really able to perform with our kids at a very high level. The audience loved the concert, the families loved the concert, and it was enjoyed by all.
And it also allows the audiences and the community members to have something to do, a learning opportunity and a cultural experience to do when we're so busy with different schedules and a lot of the kids may not be engaged per se, but this allows us to bring musicians and communities together that vary from multiple zip codes, multiple cities, different states even.
Awesome. It's great to see that action really taking place at Intempo. So at New World Symphony, Cassidy, I know that you have some whys that you use as a framework. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I want to pick up on a couple of the threads that Tehvon and Angie shared too, and to say that I truly believe that as performing arts organizations, educational institutions, we have an obligation to our communities to provide resources and access to the performing arts. And I'm just going to let that sit for a minute because I've definitely been in meetings where we have discussed community engagement as if it were audience development or if it were perhaps chasing some funding. And so I really had to develop a framework so that I could help articulate why we needed to do certain programming, why we weren't able to accommodate certain programming, and really assess every program in our portfolio. My primary role at New World Symphony is to educate the fellows of New World Symphony. So I have a little bit different of an entry point than perhaps some of your organizations, but every time a new project or program comes across my desk, I try to answer 3 whys. Why would this program be important for the fellows? Why would this program be important for the audience or the participants in the program? And how would it serve New World Symphony and our brand? And if I don't have a convincing reason for all 3 of those whys, we can't pursue the program. And I've drawn many a line in the sand with my colleagues, but it's really served me well, and also has served me well because then when I articulate the need for something to a funder or to an artistic director or to a musician, I've already thought of all the answers. And I have it right at my fingertips to share why this is important and why we need to use the necessary resources. Something Tehvon said about outreach and community engagement, I think a good community engagement program is mutually beneficial to your organization and your audience or participants, and that it is reasonable to find the benefit to your organization. That might not necessarily be audience development or funding, as I said, but there should still be a why, I think, and that's really important to remember. So I really appreciate that Angie also focuses on making sure that each engagement is of value to her students as well as to the people who are asking for the engagement experience.
Absolutely, yeah, really keeping that mission in the forefront and keeping the students really, really key in that work. You bring up a great point as well around funding. So let's talk about money a little bit. Tehvon, tell me a little bit about the balance. We often see community engagement being used as a means to bring in new funders, as a way to become more attractive to different audiences who may bring in more ticket sales. Tell us a little bit about that balance and how you guys manage that.
Yeah, and a good example is something that I'm actually going into a meeting with this week with the Berkeley and Borough President's Office, and that we introduced them to education programs we were doing in other communities, and they said, I want to give you $5,000 for this program. But what was also attached to that was, I want to look into other communities in which this benefits. And that kind of pointed something out to me, in that she had the president had another audience in mind for it. And for that, I wanted to make sure that my team understood that this is not just money to go towards things that already exist. She also wants to expand the reach for this. And so before we accept this, before we accept any sort of gift, we have to sit down and have a meeting with them, decide, is this the best kind of program for the audience that you have in mind or for the community that you have in mind? Is there something else that we can plan that they can benefit from? And is this, if we're going to go into this community or this new community and create a new meaningful program, is this something that we should be planning over the course of a certain amount of time as opposed to trying to do it immediately? And so I think a lot of people, especially when you're starting in a very young organization or where you're just starting out trying to create a nonprofit or any sort of program service, you think of the money first, and I think it's something you should try and avoid, and think more about what it means for the community and what it means for the program, so that you're not getting yourself caught up in what I would consider to be a mission creep and kind of going after an audience that you weren't necessarily thinking about before at the cost of your organization. Because the thing about this program that is up for discussion for National Sawdust is the fact that we can provide this community program and engage in this new community in a meaningful way, but the program itself costs more than what they are willing, or more than what they offered to begin with. And so that's also a question of how do we raise the rest of the funds to make this as meaningful of a program as it is in other communities in which we do this.
Absolutely. Angie, any perspective from InTempo?
Yeah, so I think the way that I look at it, the way that we look at it is that we have to have a tangible and clear return on investment, because that's right, community engagement takes time, takes human resources, takes marketing, takes videos, takes planning hours. And oftentimes, when a larger institution perhaps may want to pursue a partnership with a smaller institution, it creates an unequal playing field per se, but us wanting to get ourselves known, we decide to just put in some type of sweat equity per se. But as you look into it and as you continue to grow as an organization and as a person, you really look into, is this really worth it? Is it worth it only $5,000, or is my time and my team's time worth more than that?
Absolutely. And Cassidy, you spoke a little bit about kind of advocating for really authentic ways of going about it. Can you share a little bit more?
Yeah, I've been lucky, and New World has been lucky to work with some funders who are really partners as well as financial resources. And I was reflecting on the panel that Kane led earlier about audience engagement, and Alex shared a story about really showing up in relationships and as community partners, and it made me think about how this is all one big circle of showing up for each other. And in a good community engagement program, you've shown up for your partners, you've listened, you've understood their needs, they show up for you, they support your performances, your musicians, your mission, whatever it is. And the same with funders. You want a funder who really understands the needs of the population that you're working with, and also the needs of your organization, so that they're willing to fund the overhead, or they're willing to fund those things that on paper are not always the most attractive things to a donor, but really make a difference. So I was really just struck like that, because I thought, how many times has our friend or our brother invited us to some show that maybe really isn't our taste or we've never experienced before, but you show up because of the relationship. And I think that's just such a valuable lesson, that if you invest the time and you invest in the relationship, people will show up for you when you ask them to.
Absolutely, yeah. Cassidy, you also brought up a really great point around audience development. And often we've seen organizations using community engagement as a way to engage with Black and brown communities, to increase ticket sales, to tout some DEI perspectives for their organization. And that's something that we have to be very, very careful of. So Angie, as a leader of color of a cultural institution that's really focused on a specific community, what are some ways that we can authentically engage in this work without further marginalizing communities of color?
Yeah, that's an ongoing battle that I continue to remind myself that I have to stand up for my community, for the people that I represent, for the people that trust us in providing value and bringing them visibility. So oftentimes, and it's an educational gap that some other institutions may not know 100%, and they just call us or look to us to bring, a bus full of Latinos, in our case, to their concert halls. But it's an opportunity to make ourselves known, to let them know that this is not just about filling those seats, but it's about an authentic engagement. And one of the things that I've learned is to say no, and other times to learn how to work a partnership, which will take time, but then it will eventually make it a win-win situation, so that it's not just a one-side benefit.
Absolutely. And Tehvon, any additional thoughts?
I actually heard something really interesting in a panel discussion, I think it was yesterday, in which it kind of changed my thinking a little bit, in that instead of kind of going in and saying, like, these are the things that we can provide, it really takes a lot of research and saying, like, are there already services or programs that are within this community that are doing this work? Can you help them and can you essentially provide resources to them as opposed to trying to do things on your own? And in regards to marketing, or not marketing, but building audiences for what our main programming is, I think that again, while I could still reach out to a similar community for both our main programming and also for community engagement, the question that I'm asking in both of those cases is different. From the outreach perspective and building an audience, it is, hey, this is what we have to provide. Would you be interested in this? And in terms of community engagement, I'm going into that community and saying, what is it that you are lacking, and how can we fill this need for you? And so that's kind of how I approach it. And I think that goes beyond any sort of racial line, in that there are plenty of communities, black, brown, white, anything really, that can use that support. And really, I think of it as my mission to try and provide in the best way that both I and the people that I'm trying to serve feel is right.
Absolutely. It's so simple, right? Just asking the question, listening, and then responding, right? Cassidy, you have a really interesting perspective from the majority perspective, especially in Miami. So tell us a little bit about sort of effective ways that you've found to engage.
Sure. So as you rightly point out, in Miami, the majority of the population identifies as Latinx, the vast majority. And I moved to Miami from Boston 8 years ago, and I was born in DC, and I grew up in Connecticut, and definitely was used to a white majority space for most of my life. So I've had to listen first and learn, and also try to, one of the sessions last year, Monique from Longy shared her practice of using an intersectional lens to lift up the voices that needed to be lifted up. And I found that to be a really useful exercise in my practice of, when do I need to use my voice to advocate for someone? When do I need to just create a space for them to use their own voices? When do I need to be silent? When do I need to help the fellows be the advocates for whomever? And it's a process. I'm certainly not perfect, and I certainly don't know that I'm the best person to be making all of the community engagement decisions for my organization. But I will say that I try very hard to learn about others' perspectives and to challenge my own innate biases and grow.
Absolutely. Definitely starting with that listening piece is so essential and so critical. So we've actually come to the part of our discussion that I'm most excited about, which is hearing your perspectives and thoughts and questions. So there are mics that are here on the floor. I would invite anyone who has a question to head to one of those mics. And we'll get started actually with a quick question from Slido, asking Cassidy to share a little bit more about the whys, restate them first, maybe share a little bit, maybe a specific example if you have one that you have found is really effective.
Sure. So earlier, for anybody else who came in later, I talked about how when a program or a new project comes my way, I try to evaluate it in the context of 3 whys and to develop answers to why we should pursue this program or project. And for me, those are, why is this important for the learning of the fellows of New World Symphony? Why is this important for the audience or the participants in the project? And why is this important for the New World Symphony? So an example of that is 2.5 years ago, we were contacted by our friends at Carnegie Hall, and they asked if we would be interested to host the National Youth Orchestra 2 for a residency, and they wanted to know whether some of our fellows would want to act as coaches in the employ of Carnegie Hall. So this is a big project. We typically are quieter in the summer. The fellows are not with us. We are allowed to take our vacation then. We can often take a kind of a deep breath, so it was a big ask of the team to add in effectively a summer camp week. We also house the NYO2 students at our residences where the fellows live during the school year. But I sat down and I thought, okay, why is this important for the fellows? Well, one, it's a great avenue for them to become better teachers and to work with a diverse student body of people who are not so different from the fellows and probably are on a path that many of the fellows took to become fellows of New World Symphony. Why is this important for the audience or the participants? Obviously, NYO and NYO2 are great life-changing programs for pre-college musicians, and they have an opportunity to work with world-class faculty, to travel to different parts of the country or around the world. Easy peasy. Why is this important for New World Symphony? While it is a significant financial investment for us, selfishly, it's a long-term recruitment strategy because the more high schoolers who know about us in high school, the more likely they are to want to come be fellows when they finish their bachelor's or master's degree. And two, we were invited to be part of a national brand with an incredible reputation. And I thought the more we can align with these kind of products, and also as we put our foot out in leaders in the EDI space, what better way to put our money where our mouth is than to support this program?
Absolutely, that's really helpful. Great, so why don't we start here?
Hi, I just wanted to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation. It's super interesting. So we've been talking a lot about the front end of these projects and the funding and the conversations that go into creating them. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the back end and the way that your organizations are measuring and evaluating your outcomes for the people involved.
I'm happy to speak on that end. So the concert that we have with the Norwood Youth Symphony in March takes 3 months of my time from a full-time perspective in terms of organizing, planning it, fundraising, and it's both a fundraiser avenue for us as well as a large-scale exposure avenue for both partners. So that's 3 months full-time. A year in advance, we have already decided at repertoire the culture that we're going to focus, and now we have a 5-year strategy to say in 5 years, your students and our students in our community is going to be exposed to India, hip-hop, any other cultures that we prioritize and that we ask our partners and our students that they want to learn. And the day-to-day, the week-to-week is we have to rehearse this music. We have to talk to our teaching artists, make sure that it's embedded into their lesson plans. And that shows the progress that, the executive director said that since 2012, our students could only play open strings and sing in the choir. But now in 2019, our students are part of the orchestra, and we are presenting what we envision as an integrated orchestra that includes violins, violas, and your standard Western instruments, but also the non-Western instruments that we work with.
At New World, we do a lot of surveying, and just like there's 3 Ys, we do try to survey both the fellows, so the people, the teaching artists, the audience or participants, as well as any institutional partners, so that we're getting a multi-angle picture of the impact we're having. It's one of my long-term goals to initiate a real research study about the impact of the fellowship in general, especially in terms of the field, because we are constantly looking for ways to better tell our stories. And I know our alumni are out there doing amazing things, and we would love to be able to quantify that. So if there's any research organizations out there, I'd really like to talk to you. And the same for community engagement programs. But I would say it's a lot of surveys, a lot of talking to people, a lot of focus groups, and documenting it and iterating on the feedback we get and changing those programs.
And I think for me, this is a new role. I've been a national sodist for about 32 days now. And what I found is that within a lot of the programs that we offer, there aren't these self-evaluation tools for my staff. And so as I approach this conversation on Wednesday with the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, I'm bringing along the person who has been kind of leading the charge on these community engagement programs. And what I want to do is kind of encourage my senior curator for our main stage programs, encourage everyone who has a part in creating programs for the organization to think about the whys that Cassidy asks for her organization, and like, how are we doing? How can we make this better? But also taking, or after we complete these programs, taking it back to the people who we serve and asking those same questions to them and saying, how can we improve and make this better?
Fantastic.
Hello. Thank you again so much for having this panel. I am a teaching artist with the Yale School of Music Initiative. Connecticut,
yeah.
Represent. And the Yale School of Music Initiative serves the New Haven public school system where 77% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. There's about 47% Black and about 38% students are Hispanic. But as I've been with this program, I've noticed more and more of the resources, the teaching artists, and the time spent being diverted to the flagships of the organization with the honors, bands, and choirs, and the summer program, which do a lot of good, but there's constantly this left behind factor of the neighborhood schools not the magnet schools. Can you guys speak to any stories you've had with this or ways you've overcome this kind of inequity within the system itself?
Yeah, definitely. Briefly, definitely want to touch base with you and see how we can strategize to speak to Dean Yaffe at Yale.
Yes.
It's a partnership that I'm also pursuing for the past couple of years. It's difficult. It's a challenge for us and a call to action to arm ourselves and equip ourselves with value and say, I need to bring this to their attention and I need to make it relevant and I need to let them know that all of these people are not being served by what is supposed to be a community and a citywide approach. So finding allies and seeking change with leadership. That's been my approach.
I think for me, I've always been in a place in which there's like, I think it's just like the nature of how my mind works, and that I see a lot of, I see the things that are working and that are being very well supported, and I also see the parts in which we can do a lot of work. And the one thing that I encourage people is, I mean, be diplomatic about it, but also, if this is something that you believe in, like it sounds like a very serious need that needs to be filled, and you should always feel comfortable in speaking up for it. And if you don't feel like those resources will still be diverted, then it's also kind of a question of social investment on your part. Is, should I put more work into this, these aspects myself that need a little bit more love, and let the results speak for themselves.
The other way I've tackled this, if the programming doesn't totally align with what I'm trying to accomplish for the fellows, is to then make sure that I'm going to advocate for those organizations that are doing the access work or doing the beginner instrument work in my case. So using your voice in the space that you exist in to advocate for programs who are doing that work and make sure that you're educated about what those other programs are doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely kind of championing everything that everyone said, but really finding those strength in partnerships, strength in numbers, and finding ways to advocate together, certainly. Great. So actually one interesting question from Slido that's come in. What might be ways to inspire white, wealthy funders to take on the issues of EDI and feel a part of the mission of community work in addition to just writing a check? Any thoughts on ways to engage our funders?
That I want to get some feedback on that too, but one of the things that I've been preparing for a next panel at Yale actually, it's making that that recognition between the empathizers and the sympathizers. So when you have a partnership with, for example, Spread Music Now, who is a donor who may be willing to give you unrestricted funding, showing them how important it will be and showing them why you don't want them just to write a check, but you want them to come to your concerts, I invite them to be a thought partner. And it has been a great multi-year ongoing relationship. But you also have obviously those donors that either you want to get their attention, and the way that I am continuing to do this is telling them about it. Oftentimes we live in our own bubble, or I live in my own bubble too, and we have to expose these wealthy donors per se that, at least in Connecticut, are concentrated in the top 1% wealth of the nation. But if I'm able to invite them and convince them that coming to this 1 hour long concert, that's not going to be static, it's not going to be their standard Western repertoire, that they're going to have a lot of fun while learning about a new culture, that's been one way to be able to change the mindsets of the empathizers and the sympathizers.
The chairman of the New World Symphony Board of Trustees is a white man, and he has challenged the board to make sure that EDI issues remain at the top of their agenda at their quarterly board meetings, and that all of the programming of New World is aligning around these priorities. And when he speaks about it, he makes two statements. And one is that he feels like we have an obligation to do this because it's the right thing to do, but two, that he finds that it makes absolute best business sense. And he comes from a business background. He started his own business very successfully, obviously. And so he talks about the change that has happened in some parts of the corporate world and how it has just grown business exponentially. So he feels like it's good business practice to make sure that we have diverse, equitable, inclusive spaces.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we do at Challenge the Stats is we make sure that in every concert there's some element of discussion, whether it's just from the stage, but it's some way that everyone who leaves the audience doesn't just say, this was a great concert, it was great to see black and brown faces on stage. There's really something to talk about in the car. There's something that continues that discussion. We do that in surveys following up. We continue to press in on the issues so that people don't just leave having a great experience, but they really have something to chew on that probably made them a little uncomfortable. So finding ways to kind of weave that into programming as well can also be a really effective way to have a follow-up meeting with that funder and really ask them those direct questions again. So great. Question here?
My name is Ken Fisher, and I'm a longtime executive with UMS, which is the Performing Arts Presenting Organization affiliated with the University of Michigan. I'd just like to recognize that Angelica and Angie and Tehvon are all part of our lead cohorts. They're outstanding people identified by Sphinx as the future of our field, and that Cassidy has been a resource to that group. So I just want to acknowledge how important this session is. I was involved with an organization that was quite literally stuck in an ivory tower, who had a sense that we need to go it alone because our standards are so high. Now, I never believed that, but as part of our evolution to an organization that became very active in our community, I found practicing 4 principles of partnership to be right at the heart, and we've practiced those now. One is, well, communication and cooperation are clear, and I think we all understand what those mean, but it's vulnerability and reciprocity that are the key that we needed to practice. And vulnerability is you go into new relationships with humility, you listen, you ask a lot of questions, and you realize where you've been in the past with particular groups, like the communities of shared heritage in the Southeast Michigan with whom we had no relationship, and we needed to build these relationships. Outreach was the last thing we wanted to do when outreach meant going in a one-way situation. But reciprocity was particularly important, and our view of that was that in entering these partnerships, we want to be sure that those with whom we partner are benefiting as much or more than we are from these relationships, that so often those relationships were exploitive, and we just wanted to have no part of that. So I want to give Sharon King the benefit. I learned these from her back 25 years ago, I think. Communication, cooperation, vulnerability, reciprocity.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
A question from the side.
Hello, my name is Dominique Holley. I run a chamber music group based in Arizona, Phoenix. I had a question that kind of was brought up in a previous panel today about funding. Because I know right now a lot of the funders are primarily white institutions, and as someone, and like as we get better at getting people of color in leadership roles, I wonder if the thought of diversifying who the funders are, because even though we're in leadership roles, still the money that we have to ask for to fund our initiatives comes from non-people of color, and they're kind of like at the door of who gets what for funding. So I wonder if some of the speakers had any thoughts about how to think about that issue, or like thoughts on how to like kind of solve it. I don't know.
On thoughts of how to solve it, I mean, it's kind of the thing of just having those daring conversations and willing to go to people that you would never think would be interested in this and really making the case. And it's just kind of the whole thing of just donor cultivation in general, is that you have to do a lot of research and figure out one, who is best suited to support you, but also what is the best message to convey to them. And I totally agree with you in that one of the keys that we miss a lot in terms of just diversifying our field is the fact that a lot of the progress has been slowed by the fact that the people kind of at the top who had the most financial leverage has been largely not as diversified, and it's been the slowest kind of group to change. So that's kind of it. It's just really doing your research into seeing who might be possible to kind of get into this field and making feel, one, as interested as possible, but also as welcome as possible, and kind of joining us in fulfilling this collective mission.
And I would just like to add a reminder that I have to remind myself too, that people give money to people. And when you show them the vision, when you show them that you have the drive to make something happen and that you're committed to excellence and sharing their core values of funding what they feel comfortable investing in, that can also be powerful when you do go to this predominantly white funder who holds the money, and you're able to show them that you're committed to this, and therefore they should also take a leap of faith and invest in a new leader, in a new value proposition.
Absolutely. I think it's exactly what you're saying, continuing to push those boundaries and push the realities of the field. So finding ways to speak truth to power so that those who are in power, those white funders who are in power, are really using their funding to continue to build up sort of that next generation or the leaders who are already in the field as well. So.
And I will also add that there are a lot of kind of wealthy white people who already sit on our boards who,
Absolutely.
I mean, as much as we think that there are people who kind of want things to stay the way that they are, I've met a lot of people who run these foundations, who sit on our boards, who really want things to change for the better, not just for sustaining these institutions, but also for making it a more equitable field. So.
Great. Oh, I'm so sorry. We're actually going to go right here because we were just here. Sorry.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for being here. So my question has to do with, could any of you speak to giving some advice to people like me? I'm a composer and performer who I'm conservatory educated and trained at a predominantly white institution, and an institution that waves the flag of loving diversity, but doesn't have any people of color on faculty or in power positions on the administration. So I have been one of those people who does attempt to speak truth to power, but I have found myself ostracized or punished by the powers that be, that at the same time will say, oh, we love diversity, but they only love it, it seems, insofar as the image of that loving it can serve them. So, it's insidious, and I just don't know how to really maneuver coming from that world and being a minority and dealing with that level of hypocrisy. So, could any of you shed some light on someone who's in my situation? Like, what do you do when you're dealing with hypocrisy?
My founder, the founder for our organization for National Sawdust and artistic director, she is a composer. And as a woman, she felt the same way in a very large institution in which it's kind of like what they say they want is very different from how she felt treated. And from my perspective, I know that those conversations are really difficult to have, especially when you run the risk of ruining your career, of kind of feeling like less than and being disciplined. But you should still have those conversations because they need to be had in order for change to happen. And it's uncomfortable, but it does need to happen. But what she did was she created something for herself that she thought was more reflective of what she thought the industry needed. National Sawdust is built entirely off of supporting the voices of the people who are otherwise ignored in our field. And so I'm really thankful to be at the place that I am because I align very much with that vision and giving a voice to the voiceless through external means. Something Aaron Durrell told me at one point is that at a certain point, if you're feeling unsatisfied in a position, you've either realized that the people that you're trying to seek help from, they either do not have the capacity to see things your way, or they're choosing not to. And it's ultimately up to you. I know it's different because you're still in school, but at a certain point
Actually, I'm done.
You're done.
Thank
Perfect.
Goddess.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But at a certain point, it's kind of how much do you want to deal with in making the case to them before you kind of decide to go in a different direction and create what you think it should be for yourself and
Thank
for
you.
others.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think also just kind of to tap onto that, a lot of times the emotional burden falls on people of color to continue to push those boundaries, and so finding your tribe and your people who are really on the same page, just to have a space to communicate about that, to really release, is really, really important. So finding that balance for yourself as a woman of color as you're sort of pushing against the powers that be is really critical. Yeah. So I think we have time for maybe one more question right here.
Hello, my name is Anthony. I come up from a El Sistema-based program called Yakima Music Conexion that's in Washington State. It provides access to musical education to a really like high poverty city. We're all like Latinos, and it's like not as diverse as I want it to be, but it is like minorities. And I was just wondering how we could reach out when all of our parents are kind of like sort of immigrants, and it's really hard for us to even afford to learn music, which is a really expensive like thing to do. So I guess any suggestions on just more relationships with other music programs that would be willing to help or provide.
I totally understand you, and I totally identify with you as an immigrant woman from Ecuador. My advice or the approach that I took is sharing my story, being vulnerable to say I come from a background that could not afford lessons. My mother had 3 jobs. One was just to pay for my music education. The other one was to pay rent, and the third one was to buy groceries. And then as you're sharing your story, it's not just your story, it's the collective story of your community. Then these institutions would have to see that by them not listening to you and paying attention to your story, they are choosing to look the other way from a larger population. So happy to talk later too.
Great. Well, I think what's really helpful, sometimes in these sessions we talk about so many different ideas, and it's sometimes hard to pinpoint what are the tangible action steps. Mm-hmm. So I would love for us to take some time for each of you to really tell us, in this amazing group of people who are ready to take authentic action and community engagement, what are some things that we can really put into place right away? So maybe we'll start with Tehvon.
Again, think of it as though you are a social investor, similar to how donors would invest in you. You're investing in your community. And make sure that before you say these are the programs that you need, go to them and ask, what are you lacking? How can I help? Ask questions before making statements.
Absolutely.
My advice would be to continue to explore that resiliency that we've all had to face, but using that and flipping it as giving us strength to go for it and to continue pursuing that, and showing the partners and the institutions that we want to be visible to why this is good business. Why, if they're looking at the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the future of their institutions, they have to pay attention to it now and make a case for why it's important to partner with you or your organization in particular.
I would like to encourage us all to practice some gratitude. Gratitude that we are all here together. Gratitude that somebody impacted our lives musically to bring us to this place. Gratitude that we have the opportunity to impact other people's lives. And I think genuine community engagement is about real connection, and so we should all be grateful for those connections.
Absolutely. So really developing those connections and relationships, having that gratitude. I think one thing that would be interesting, we have a little bit of time, Angie, if you would kind of expand a little bit on the idea of why is this important for business and sort of a very specific way that we can kind of advocate.
Yeah, so the way I would look at it is from multiple sectors. Oftentimes I as a musician or as artists, we look at it from one side, a very narrow side, because we want to promote what we truly care for. But I had to realize that it's not just me for the sake of creating music, it's for the sake of improving the lives of our students, in helping the schools make a better future for their constituents, helping our elected officials have a stronger say in the work that they are doing and representing us. So it's multiple sectors, and not just focusing on where we are right now in 2020, definitely not looking back, but how they want to be remaining relevant in the future, whether they're a legacy organization right now, but how they would continue to remain relevant, and how it's a no-brainer to become a partner.
Absolutely. I think the final point is really getting uncomfortable. If you are not willing to get uncomfortable, this work really does not push as far as it needs to go. And so getting into the community, making relationships, meeting new people, having uncomfortable conversations so that all of us can be in a learning process, sort of that community engagement versus outreach model. What are the ways in which we can really push ourselves to create some real change? So we're so thankful for this time that we've been able to spend with all of you. Thank you for joining us. We give another hand to our panel that's joined us here.
Thank you.